Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. If you've been here before, you'll notice that this morning we're doing things a little differently than usual. So there will be some familiar things in different places and some new things too. For instance, usually we do our affirmation of faith a little later in the worship service, but for this series, we'll be doing it a bit earlier. I invite you to join me in speaking the words of our affirmation that should be on the screen and in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We realize that not everyone can attend in person, so we are streaming this worship service online, and we extend a special welcome to all who are joining us virtually. The joys and sorrows portion of our service, however, is private, and we will take a break from streaming for that portion of the service. Other than that, the service will be recorded and available for future viewing on our website. We are about to enter sacred time. We are about to make this time and this place sacred by our presence and intention. Please turn off or silence your devices, and as you do so, I invite us also to turn down the volume on our fears, to remove our masks, and to loosen the armor around our hearts. Don't take my word for it. Do it as slowly as you need to. If you take a little risk with these good people, you may find that they have the same human needs as you do. Breathe. Let go of the expectations placed on you by others and those they taught you to place on yourself. Drop the guilt and the shame, not to shirk accountability, but an honest expectation of the possibility of forgiveness. Let go of the thing you said the other day. Let go of the thing you dread next week. Be here in this moment. Breathe here. please join us in lighting the chalice by reading together the words on the screen and in your order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
So in this worship series, we're inviting you to do some exploration and sharing with one another, which might feel a little uncomfortable or awkward, but that is totally okay. We are not about being perfect. We are about showing up and bringing our best efforts and learning together. Our covenant is inherently forgiving, but even when it is broken, even then, we still seek restoration and renewal. Stumbling is wholeheartedly welcomed. And so in that spirit, may we lean into the productive discomfort that makes possible all learning and growth and community by engaging in our recovenanting process, just as a little practice. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. I'll read off a few lines from our behavioral covenant and invite you to respond with the line, "May we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love." For all the ways that we have neglected to expand our spiritual growth and faith in action, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have not committed our hearts and minds to building a community of caring, acceptance, and reconciliation, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have not actively worked to build trust and respect in our community, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. I invite you now to join in singing hymn 1007, "There's a River Flowing in My Soul," in your teal hymnals.
There's a river
Please be seated. So as we gather in this warm sanctuary in this cold winter, last week there was a problem with our heat, and so we're very glad that it has been addressed, and we're all able to be in this warm space together. And it's also an opportunity for us, as usual, to bring into voice in this space what we've been carrying. Possibly something that has been challenging or painful, possibly something that has been joyous. All of that is welcome for us to speak and offer to one another that we may all carry it together. And so I'm going to come around the room with the microphone in just a moment, and you're welcome to share a joy or a sorrow. And I would just invite you, or ask rather, that if you choose to do so, please share with us your name so that we know who you are. Does anybody have a joy or a sorrow to share this morning? Sanctuaries of our hearts, may we continue to weave the fabric of this community into ever more beautiful patterns. So this past few weeks, we've been doing some exploring, which we will continue this morning. The vision of ministry that the board set for this current congregational year reads in part to root our desire for growth through celebration of Unitarian Universalism within the congregation and in diverse public spaces. And with this worship series, we're weaving together the exploration of a few different threads that we've been exploring over these past couple of years. So last year around this time, we talked about some Unitarians and Universalists from history. Just after that, how our society allocates resources and sometimes perpetuates injustice and what choices we can make in light of that. And this past fall, we talked about our identification, our feeling of being in this place. And just before that, took a conscious look at the relationships that we're in, what patterns we want to continue, what patterns we want to disrupt. So over this series, we'll be looking at the historical patterns and legacies that surround us and run through us in this land in which we live, and what choices we might make to heal the histories that might haunt us. And so I'll be offering some examples along the way, but the way for this series to really work is for us, for you, to also imbue this journey with both what you know from your own context and family, and also the questions that you have around what you do not know. So I hope that it will spur some conversation throughout your week. At our best, we Unitarian Universalists practice mixing with many different kinds of people and thriving in that diversity. But in order to do that, to become truly welcoming of diversity, we need to go both on an inward and an outward journey of transformation. An inward journey that deconstructs our own misconceptions and habits of which we might not be conscious, and an outward journey that focuses on deepening relationships and practicing restorative solidarity. In the first week of this series, I brought to mind that line by Adrienne Marie Brown that things are not getting worse, they are being unveiled. A lot of us in this society have a feeling of placelessness. And we discussed a few weeks ago this question of where in the world do you feel like you should be, and where in the world do you feel like you should not be? There was some wrestling that folks expressed with the question. Should I be over here? Should I be over there? And there can be some freedom in being able to make that choice. But it can also indicate a lack of being embedded in a nourishing place among nourishing people. In the second week of the series, I invite you to trace your lineage, where your people came from and how and why, and reckon with the fact that when they relocated, the vast majority of our forebears left behind who, where, and what shaped them, in most cases forever. They had to face all kinds of adjustments to a novel social universe, and in the process, the inevitable question of how much to keep of their own culture. And so we explored, what does it mean for the legacies that we carry? This reckoning and exploration had to do with the land from which they came and the land to which they came, whether that's 7 miles or 7,000 miles. Then last week, I talked about how for a great many people in this country, there's been a process of sloughing off our own heritage. There are traumas that we all carry from our ancestors, whether they've been passed down biologically or socially. Each of us are repositories for both the courage and trauma of our ancestors, whether they were victims of injustice or perpetrators of injustice, or both. There is healing to be done in each of us. Indeed, that's a cornerstone of building healthy partnerships across race and class and gender and so forth, recognizing that each of us is in the process of healing or not healing from those legacies. It's when we recognize and attend to that healing that true diversity becomes possible. In the words from an Aboriginal rights group from Queensland, Australia, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. In the discussion after the worship service last week, someone posed the question, what exactly is the purpose or value of trying to uncover those stories from our ancestors? We went around the group and everyone shared their response. Each one of them was beautiful and precious on their own. And I'll add this one onto that list. To uncover how our liberation is bound up with others. This week we'll explore the stories that can sustain and transform, that we can try to live by, that might motivate us, that might console us, that might inspire us, that might empower us to change the world for the better. And so we're going to take a moment now just to greet the people in this room that you're on this journey with. Maybe a wave of your hands, a smile, letting the warmth of your own presence fill the space between us. These fellow travelers on this journey. And we're going to discuss with one another in twos or threes this question, where last week we got into the courage and struggles of our ancestors, but this week we're going to point our attention toward the narratives, the cultural practices, the ceremonies that sustain and transform individuals and communities. The stories of conviction that we seek to live by, and which motivate us, console us, inspire us, empower us to change the world for the better. So the question that I would invite you all to consider is, what stories or cultural practices sustain, motivate, inspire, or empower you to show up boldly in the world? And so we're going to just think about that for a couple minutes silently to ourselves while Jeremy shares some beautiful music with us. And then once he's done, then I would invite folks to share what came up for them just briefly. So just consider this question of what stories or cultural practices sustain, motivate, inspire, or empower you to show up boldly in the world. So I invite you to just turn to one or two folks that you're sitting near to discuss this question. Just for 2 minutes, I will let you know when the time is up. So keep an eye out for me. I'll be with that mic and I'll try talking once the 2 minutes is up. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our sharing time. So bring your attention back here. Let the words fall away as you feel the silence in the room start to spread, and your attention come back to my voice, knowing that there's so many more things that you could say, and we'll save those words for some other time. And so I would ask folks, just one or two, maybe three folks to share into the space. What did you either hear yourself saying or hear somebody else said that stuck out to you, that resonated with you, that caught your mind or your heart particularly and stuck with you, and had you be interested in like, oh, this is something that we might be aware of, that might be a new awareness for me or for others. Just one or two folks. What did you notice hearing or saying? Yeah.
My name's June, and the cultural story that has inspired me most of my life has been the story of how our Italian family in Italy resisted Mussolini and fascism and left the Catholic Church, and some of them became Valdensian ministers within Italy. And if you know anything about the Valdensians, their priority was for the poor, and their focus was always for the poor, and they definitely merged with liberation theology, and those were and they continue to be the inspiration in my life. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. One or two more, yeah.
Just got into it a little bit, but yesterday I was going through some things that for the family and things that my parents had, and I came across 2 telegrams that were written during World War II. My uncle was stationed out in San Francisco, he and his wife, and she was expecting a baby, and he sent a telegram. That's the way it was done back then. The baby had been born, and then a few hours later, he sent a telegram that the baby had died. And I thought, that was the only connection that you had, just this cold message, and it was World War II, and I had a lot of uncles that were involved in World War II, and it's always inspiring to think about what they went through and went through for the country.
Thank you. Yeah. One more, yeah.
So, yes, as well, not in Italy, but I have a history of my parents and their friends would go out and confront Nazis and the Klan here in the Midwest, or a lot of places. And one particular story is in Marquette Park in Chicago, where the Nazis had their headquarters back in the 70s and the 80s, and my parents and their friends would go out and play integrated games of softball at the park, in Marquette Park, and then after they did that a few times, they went to the Nazi headquarters and demolished it. So there's a certain amount of violence involved in that, but nonetheless, it's very inspirational to see these unassuming people otherwise take that step. So yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, and thank you to all of you. One more, briefly.
My name's Maggie, and one story I didn't share was that when I was 10 years old, I saw my grandfather graduate from Michigan State University. He was 65. He got his master's degree. He went back to work. He had just retired, and he went to work as a teacher. Loved it. Just loved it. He taught business for 3 years, and it was probably, maybe among the happiest years of his life. But he always said he was very German, worked hard, and said, get all the education you can. That's been a big inspiration to me.
Sweet. Thank you, Maggie. So thank you all for discussing that with each other, for sharing some particular thoughts, some things that came up for you all. And I hope that even if nothing came to your mind, it at least sparked something for you to think, to consider, to wonder. is this joining together to work with these elements is such a valuable piece of being in community, so that we're not just carrying this journey and this question on our own. So Maggie's going to share with us some pieces to help us continue on the journey.
Now, please rise and body your spirit for first a reading, and then we will go right into singing together our doxology. The reading is number 680 from our hymnal by Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. We're ready. Jeremy? Our story this morning is Jericho by Christopher Weiss. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Olympia who had a dream. She dreamed that one day she would grow up to be a minister. But during the 1800s, only men were ministers, so it didn't seem likely that Olympia's dream would come true. Olympia, however, continued to dream. Time passed and the little girl became a young woman. Olympia wrote a letter to a school that taught people how to be ministers, and her letter said that she would like to study there. The school wrote back and told her it was not a good idea for her to come because she was a woman. Olympia was crushed. It was like someone had put a giant wall between her and her dream. But then she remembered a story from the Bible about a man named Joshua. Joshua was leading the Hebrew people out of the desert into the promised land. But when they arrived, they discovered they had a problem. Somebody else was living there. The Hebrew people were tired and they wanted to rest. They had wandered with Moses in the desert for 40 years trying to find a home. After Moses died, Joshua had led the Hebrew people to a beautiful land. But the people of that land didn't want to share. They had built a giant wall around the city of Jericho and were prepared to fight to keep Joshua's people out. Joshua marched up to the walled city and knocked on the door. "Open the door and let us in," he cried. But the people of the city replied, "Oh, not by the hair of our chinny chin chin." Joshua walked away feeling very sad. The walls of Jericho were very high, and there seemed no way his people could enter the city to find a home there. Feeling stressed, Joshua went to find a quiet spot to meditate. As Joshua sat in his quiet spot, he got a crazy idea. In fact, the idea was so crazy, he was sure it came from God. Joshua ran to tell his people, and all the Hebrew people gathered to hear him speak. "Let us march around the walls of Jericho and blow our ram's horn," Joshua told them. The Hebrew people were quiet for a moment. They were waiting for the rest of the idea, but Joshua remained silent. Finally, someone said, "And then what?" "That's it," Joshua said. "That's the plan. Don't you love it?" We will march around the walls of the city once a day for 7 days and blow our horns. Now, most of the people thought Joshua had lost his marbles, but they went along with the idea. For 6 days, they marched around the walls of Jericho, blowing their horns, and in truth, they felt like idiots. But on the 7th day, something incredible happened. As the Hebrew people blew their horns, the walls of Jericho began to rumble and shake. Suddenly, the city walls came tumbling to the ground. Joshua's crazy idea had worked. The Hebrew people were free to walk right into the promised land. As Olympia remembered the story of Joshua, she began to get her own crazy idea. She decided that she would go to the school for ministers and take classes no matter what anyone else said. And that is just what she did. The men didn't know what to do when Olympia showed up. They got very nervous and tried to talk her out of her dream. But Olympia wouldn't let anyone put a wall between her and her dream. Finally, the men decided they could not stop Olympia. She studied hard and was every bit as smart, if not smarter, than the men in the school. In 1863, Olympia Brown was ordained a Universalist minister. She was one of the first woman ministers in America. Olympia's dream came true because she knew that although there is a time to be quiet, sometimes you have to blow your own horn before the walls come tumbling down. Now please rise in body or spirit to join us in singing hymn 111 in your gray hymnal, Do You Hear?
So I went to a regular public school, as I'm sure many of you did, and experienced some degree of discomfort and alienation, as I'm sure many of you did in high school as well. But I also feel very fortunate to have gotten to go to Unitarian Universalist youth conferences at the same time and be introduced to things like the game Wink. I don't think that Unitarians invented it. I've heard that maybe Quakers might have invented it, but its origins are somewhat hazy. Has anybody heard of the game Wink before? No. Am I the only one in the room? Wow. Okay, so game Wink, which is not a safe game by any means, but this is the 80s. So so basically, all the kids would divide up into two roughly equal size groups. One of them would be an inside circle, and one of them would be the outside circle. And so there'd be these two sort of concentric circles, and each person on the inside circle would have a partner on the outside. So basically, it's a ring of folks with one person sitting behind them. And the goal of the game is for the person in the front to get to the particular person who has no partner, who goes by the title God for the purposes of this game, and to kiss them on the cheek. And the goal of the person sitting behind them is to prevent that from happening. And so it's sort of like a somewhat structured wrestling match. It's advised to not play it on a concrete floor, although it's doable, I have found. A wood floor is a little bit more pliant. The problem with carpet, it's softer, but you can get rug burns really easy, so that's not necessarily the best either. So like a wood floor, I would advise, usually the best place to do that. Still high chance of injury, but the benefit of this game, beyond the just fun and like diving into this embodied practice, was also how radically different it was from anything like I was doing in regular high school. It was just a completely different way of meeting other people, of engaging with them, of doing stuff together, of having fun. It was like stepping into almost an alternate reality. And in addition to playing Wink, other stuff that would happen at regular Unitarian Universalist youth conferences were things like cuddle piles and workshops and people getting their hair dyed and warm welcomes when you walk in the door, or somebody you haven't seen for 3 months who's from a church maybe 60 miles away, circle worships late into the night, designed and organized by youth themselves. This whole thing was all a youth-run movement within Unitarian Universalism. The youth designing it, creating it, putting it together, making all of the logistics happen. And in the context of this experience, I felt like I found a place that I fit. This Unitarian Universalist tradition of youth conferences has been going on for several decades now, this way of experiencing beloved community. And I was very glad to learn there was a recent youth conference in Milwaukee for folks from all over the central Midwest area. They had over 50 teens there, which it was a remarkable time from what I hear. And so I'm delighted that that tradition still continues, because I know how wonderful it was for me, how life-giving it was for me to get to experience. There are experiences that each of us have that cause a shift or a change of perspective in our lives. And some of those we tell our kids about, some of those we are told about that our parents experienced, and we get to hear those stories, or maybe partake in some rituals, maybe some annual gathering with friends, or maybe a holiday meal that your parents and grandparents always made a point of holding, or maybe a story that you've heard and retell about something remarkable an aunt or an uncle did. There are so many different forms that this could take. It would be impossible to list them all. But these stories and rituals that were so beautiful that I'm using my particular experience of the Unitarian Universalist youth conferences to describe this beautiful and meaningful experience that each of us has in different forms. How much more beautiful and meaningful they get if a story or ritual is one not just that is experienced and then goes away, but that gets passed on and told about. One that gets remembered. I've only been to Europe once. The one time that I went, there were a few different stops, and I almost accidentally stopped in Austria for a day, Vienna, and just was trying to figure out something to do for the day, and I just happened to walk into St. Stephen's Cathedral, which in its current form has existed for hundreds of years, but as a parish, for almost 1,000 years. And just being in that space, even as a Unitarian Universalist with no experience of Catholicism, tapping into just the sense of all of the generations of people who sought and found succor in that space. In birth, in marriage, in death, as well as all those who were oppressed by the Roman Catholic Church over those years through persecution of so many different sorts. The trials and tribulations, the healing and redemption of untold numbers of people entangled in that space. How does one respond when the greatest joys and sorrows of millions are testified to in a particular place. We humans are a storytelling, ritualistic people. That's how we learn. That's how we know who we are. Much of our own history has been covered over, partly through a sanitized public memory, partly through many of our own ancestors feeling too much pain to pass on the memory, partly through their being led to believe that their own stories aren't as valuable as the bigger public stories. Some adventurous music in the room. But as psychologist Eugene Gendlin has written, what is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it's true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it. Whether or not the stories are told, the truth lives on in our behaviors, in our habits, in our sensitivities. We just lose the ability for those stories to bring us together around their truth. And instead, we end up gathering around stories that might not be the truth or might be crafted to create a particular effect. Many of you might have heard of the Texas School Book Commission that uses its market power to get textbook makers to change what's in the textbooks in the state of Texas because they buy so many of them that McGraw-Hill is going to say, okay, if you don't want to teach it this way, we will change what our textbook says so that you'll continue to buy our books. So that would be a conscious way of crafting stories. Sometimes it's less conscious, but it reveals the preferences of the dominant culture in which we live. I'm guessing that not many of you know the people named Isor Danielovich or Ramon Estevez or Krishna Pandit Banji or Edda Van Heemstra Rustin or Tom Mapother or Winona Horowitz or Jennifer Anastasakis. But you probably know Kirk Douglas or Martin Sheen or Ben Kingsley or Audrey Hepburn or Tom Cruise or Winona Ryder or Jennifer Aniston. Sir Ben Kingsley in an interview once related that changing his name from Krishna Pandit Banji to Ben Kingsley resulted him immediately getting jobs. The ethnicities of their own histories have been washed away in the public understanding in order for them to be fully welcomed. What ethnicities in your own family's history have been washed away for them to be welcomed into the fold here? All too often, our own ancestors were either pulled or pushed by society in such a way that they let go of their own ancestral stories and rituals. Some strands remain of foods or rituals or stories or whatever else is a part of our heritage, but many others end up being lost. And it's easy to pass over or miss what a huge loss that is. But it is also possible to recover some of them. Author and theologian Elaine Enns made a pilgrimage to the area in present-day Ukraine from which her ancestors came. And she describes how at Schoenfeld, a village our great-great-grandfather Enns helped found in 1869, an elderly Ukrainian peasant woman we met pointed to a family cemetery plot in the yard next to hers. And she told us that an Enns family had lived there before the revolution. They were good people, she said through our translator, and then gestured toward a low-lying area about 100 meters from us. Look there. We made our way through the bushes, snagging our clothes and stumbling on uneven ground, finally discovering what she was referring to in a small clearing hidden by the brush. A number of tombstones had been dumped there, covered now by a tangle of weeds and small trees, and searching and scraping, we found two with the name Enns. And one read, "Right now, we have many tears. Those that are true will see each other again." And the woman later explained that during the Stalin years, the Ukrainian neighbors had hauled huge gravestones away from the cemetery and hid them in the bushes so that Soviet workers would not take them to use in building. And these Ukrainians, despite their extreme poverty and suffering under Stalin's regime, had respected their Mennonite neighbors enough to make this tremendous effort to preserve their burial dignity. This was a powerful and poignant legacy for us, and inspires my husband and I to learn how to honor the human and cultural remains of the indigenous people who lived in the lands on which we now dwell. Ancestral stories and practices need not be only from our blood relatives. If we conceive of our heritage more broadly, they can include, as Enns and Myers point out, the prophetic traditions of the Black church in song, proclamation, and action, or indigenous ghost dancing, or Quaker silence, or evangelical abolitionists, or Baptist social gospelers, or Methodist labor activism, or Catholic worker service to the poor. Last week I talked about trauma, about experiences of wounding that are passed down through generations. Key to facing trauma is the capacity for resilience. When we think about resilience, we typically view it as an individual's ability to bounce back from hardship that we acquire through the years. But it's actually a combination of nature and nurture. And it's held communally rather than individually. The resilience of a child is distributed among many people. It's not something that an individual does. It's a way for all of us to show up. It takes place not so much in your own mind, but in the bodies and minds of those who care about us, who show up for us and offer us support. Being a part of a faith community like this one can promote our shared resilience, our capacity to face these stories in their wholeness. Through our sharing of joys and sorrows, through our coming back into covenant with one another, through our making meaning out of whatever trauma, through our practicing of social solidarity to rebuild our trust in the world or with one another, through receiving and offering mutual aid, through singing together, through engaging in service together, through sharing meals that embody values of inclusion and abundance, through preserving our stories, through being a social or cultural center for the broader community of which we're a part. I talked a little bit earlier about some people's hesitance to tell painful or embarrassing stories from their own family's history. There's often a temptation to be hypercritical of our forebears. But any heritage, any tradition is a mixed bag. As Enns and Myers note, the line between us and them is not a firewall. We carry the trauma and contributions of our ancestors, but also the traces of their courage and ingenuity. Honoring ways our people acted decently by practicing solidarity or mutual aid or friendship, often the hardest stories to hold on to, helps us to recover our full humanity. Although our ancestral history may be transmitted intergenerational trauma, it also planted seeds of courage, strength, and love. In Olympia Brown's bringing up that story from the book of Joshua, it's both a hard story, particularly given the current events that are going on in Gaza, but it also carries the seeds of courage, strength, and love. When Brown drew on the story of Jericho in the 19th century, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Nowadays, it's in the West Bank, and the walls were built and maintained by the State of Israel. Whether we choose to tell them or not, our ancestors' stories still live on and influence what we think and how we act in the present. We cannot escape them. If we try, they will continue to haunt us without our even being aware quite of what's going on. As Enns and Myers write, no one in the U.S. can escape slavery's haunting of soil and soul, ghosts as omnipresent as those of indigenous dispossession. Regardless of whether or not your own blood relatives were directly entangled in the system of chattel slavery, those of us who are white people have our privileges that are nevertheless rooted in the bitter legacy of American apartheid. But it's also true as Vincent Harding said, that all moral imagination begins with memory. Our ability to even imagine a more moral way of being is rooted in our own experiences and our family's experience and legacies of those that we're connected to that tell of other possibilities. My own moral imagination, even in my own life, has so much to do with those youth conferences that I experienced, of feeling that inclusion, that curiosity, that joining together in service and that growth. That moral imagination is what can guide us where there is no template, where there is no menu, and build new possibilities of solidarity there. And so my invitation to you over this coming week is just to consider for yourself. In order for you to feel sustained, transformed, motivated, consoled, inspired, or guided, whichever of those speak to you, to what cultural narratives or traditions might you turn? To what cultural narratives or traditions might you turn for your own sustenance, your own transformation, your own motivation, your consolation, your inspiration, your guidance? Just as Olympia Brown turned to the story of Joshua and blazing her trail in the face of sexism, just as Elaine Enns uncovered a story of solidarity in her ancestors' past, which motivated her solidarity work with others in the present day, what stories or practices can orient us as we journey in covenant with one another? What rivers of resilience are flowing in our soul, in our heart, in our mind that flowed from those who came before us, that you might not even have noticed until we start turning our attention towards them? These nourishing heritages of which we are the rightful heirs. What rivers flow within you? What do you hear in the hush of your soul? And building from the moral imagination that makes these possible in you, what new way shall we work towards?
We know that when we join together, we can build a new way in the world by sharing our resources. This month, we are sharing our Loose Change for Social Change offering with the Homeless Veterans Program at the Adam Benjamin Jr. VA Outpatient Clinic in Crown Point. In less than 2 years, the Homeless Veterans Program has served over 600 veterans in the Northwest Indiana. Within the vast number spans gender, racial, and economic lines, and a variety of challenges, including service injury, transportation, a variety of mental health conditions, addiction, and homelessness. You may wonder, doesn't the VA fund services to help? Well, yes, of course they do, with housing, transitional shelter, case management positions like my own. But your Loose Change will help, for example, the 69-year-old veteran with zero income pay for the $15 fee for a birth certificate, top up minutes on his phone so he can do a phone interview for food stamps, and a meal from Subway before he heads back to the VA-funded emergency hotel stay, where he will be while he waits for housing approval. Your change shortens the time from homelessness to the security of a home. So thank you. The money in the baskets. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our congregation, and the money in the cups goes to the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Program. For those not with us in person today, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations. Would 4 volunteers please come forward, or 3 extra volunteers? Another way that we build a new way is by joining together for fun and fellowship. We have a couple of announcements. Tax statements to reflect your donations are available. Please see James or Ashley in the parish hall during coffee hour to get yours. And on February 4th, after the service, please join us for a discussion on our church's mission statement. There are materials available to prepare for the discussion. Let us know if you would like a copy. Please see Sandy after the service, and she'll help you get a copy. Now please rise in body or spirit to join in the singing of number 1017, Building a New Way. Please be seated. And now may we have faith and life to do wise planting, that the generations to come may reap even more abundantly than we. May we be bold in bringing to fruition the golden dreams of human kinship and justice. This we ask, that the fields of promise become fields of reality. After the postlude, we will extinguish this flame, but we will continue to carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again.
last week we tried our post-worship discussion at a table in there. It seemed to work pretty well, so we'll try that again today and see if it works as well this week. So if you're interested in joining us for that, we'll be doing it about 12:35 or so.